Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And oh, wait, sorry, folks. Wait one moment. Oh, sorry about that, folks. Okay, anyways, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. It's another one of our All Things Africa edition. We continue to explore the history and current affairs of each African country. We continue to explore Southern Africa, the Southern Africa region. And on this episode, we're going to be looking at the history and current affairs of the country of Lesotho. Who better to teach us about this country or any African country than our historical guide, our tour guide, Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Abayomi is a longtime historian, journalist, and Pan-Africanist leftist and anti-imperialist campaigner. And again, just before we begin, we remind our audience, please share widely all of One Plus One's content, past, present episodes, our playlists, help us overcome the far-right algorithms and the dominant monopoly, Western corporate state media, and pseudo-leftist websites. Have the social media world by sharing our content, share us across social media and email, and please donate to One Plus One if you can, or PayPal. And if people are having trouble and would prefer an alternative form of donation, then get in touch with me at Youri at Gmail. And Facebook sometimes blocks my ability to share One Plus One, so again, please share widely. It helps the show immensely. And folks, don't forget to help out colleague, comrade, friend Chris Richards of the Eclectic Radical, who's struggling with unemployment. Become a patron of his, because if you help Chris out, you're helping me out. And we would like to do future journalism projects, but we need people donating in order to do that. So now, on to the topic at hand. But Abayomi, before we talk about Lesotho very briefly, then there's been a new president-elect of Benin, and there was recent elections in Benin, and the new president, who I believe is going to be the ninth president that the Beninese people have elected, Romuald Wadnigi, I believe that's how you say his name, and according to Wikipedia, he served as Benin's Minister of Economy and Finance since April 2016. Prior to entering politics, he worked for the consulting firm Deloitte for 17 years, and he was first appointed the Minister of Economy and Finance on the 7th of April 2016 under the Patrice Talon government, and was subsequently reappointed. Okay, one moment, folks. Oh, geez. Sorry about that, folks. Sorry about that.
You were breaking up.
Yes. It's okay. Sorry about that, folks. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now clearly.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. The internet was going down. So, anyways, so he was the Minister of Economy and Finance under the Patrice Talon government, and he was reappointed with the rank of senior minister. Talon was an independent. Wadnigi is also an independent. Now, I didn't have the chance to rewatch our past episode on Benin. So, briefly, given all your knowledge on Benin, what can you say that the vast working poor and destitute poor of Benin can expect from this incoming administration? And if there's any brief background context you want to give, please do give that before we talk about Lesotho.
Well, we can always hope, but with the coup d'etat against Talon, a lot of people there said it was a fake effort, that it wasn't for real. It was just a tactic, to move him out and move in a appointed successor. So we'll see how things work out. But there's been problems between the Benin government under Patrice Talon and the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES, which is under extreme pressure right now. We know about what happened in Mali 2 weeks ago, and the fighting is still going on, although the Malian government, with the support of the Africa Corps from Russia, are fighting back. But we'll have to see what actually happens in Benin. Former French colony, and we'll have to see, largely agricultural country, but we'll have to see exactly what happens in the next few weeks and months.
But Talon was not a flaming left winger or a social democrat. He was a very right leaning pro capitalist. So with this incoming president, who was a minister and an economy minister under him, do you think it's going to just be more right-wing neo-colonialism under this new government of Benin?
Yeah, it appears that'll be the case, unless there's some type of uprising inside of Benin. Then that could change the whole dynamics of the situation. But I'm sure the French are very concerned about what happens in Benin, and they're working very hard. Even this week, they held a summit in Kenya, a French Africa summit, which there was a counter summit that was put on by the Communist Party Marxist Kenya, and several people were arrested and brutalized in Nairobi just a few days ago. And there were at least two people that I'm aware of from the US that attended the counter summit on Pan-Africanism and the struggle against imperialism. And Margaret Kimberly, who's executive editor of Black Agenda Report,
Yeah.
was there. And also there was another person from the Black Alliance for Peace. And so they've already written one article about it, and you can check out the website of the Communist Party Marxist Kenya in that regard.
Yes, and I'll also briefly say the founder of Africa Stream. I
Yeah,
don't
he's
want
a
to butcher.
Kenyan.
Yes,
Yeah,
the founder of African Stream, who also did a lot of journalism for our mutual friends and comrades at Press TV. He he now is working in with a left wing anti imperialist collective media called Sovereign Media. Julia
right.
Kassem and Julia Kassem, who's been on this show before to talk about Hezbollah, she's also done some reportings from them. And
Yeah, I
one
know
of their
Julia. She's from this area, and
yes,
we've worked with
yes,
her over the
yes,
years.
yes, yeah. As a matter of fact, that yes, that she is. She's from Michigan,
Mhm.
and one of their camera folks, or one of the members of their journalism team, was arrested during the brutal
Yes.
crackdowns in Kenya,
Yeah,
and
there are YouTube videos on that, and they also have a Facebook page. The Communist Party Marxist Kenya does have a Facebook page as well, and the Secretary General is featured, speaking out against what the Kenyan police did just several days ago in Nairobi.
yeah, and Vijay Prashad of Tricontinental was also
I
there,
saw him there too.
and and actually, before we get to Lesotho, Macron, wow, he was on a sort of not to denigrate people who have Tourette's syndrome, but every single kind of racist stuff that he could
Yeah,
that he could possibly say, or he did in a whole week.
I
Vocal
mean, he's like
politics.
somebody on ketamine or MDMA or something. He jumped up at one point. They were showing a YouTube video of him during the summit. And I was wondering, is this for real or is it AI generated or what? Just jumped up and started telling people, you're not doing this right. You're not doing that right. He even went as far as to say that we are the true Pan-Africanists. I
Yeah,
mean,
and
what a opportunistic, and distorted statement that is, because there was, even though the Pan-African Summit against imperialism appeared to be small, and modest in the outcome, just putting on something like that as a threat, to neo-colonialism, which France is a major proponent of.
it was so disturbing his behavior and him. He literally said, "We, that is France and our relations with African countries, we are the Pan Africanists, and
Exactly.
Russia are the real colonizers, and you guys need to stop buying into Russian propaganda." I'm paraphrasing, but he more or less said something like that, and it was wild.
Absurd.
I thought to I thought to myself, what is this guy on? Like it was,
I know.
and so
And the thing is, Russia never had colonies in Africa. They never participated in the Atlantic slave trade, even under the monarchy. In the 1890s, they actually helped arm and support Abyssinia when they were fighting against the Italian expansion in the Horn of Africa.
and
So
not only
under the
that, but I mean,
monarchy. you know.
But not only that, but the USSR and Cuba. If you want to talk about people who have, who are a force for good in the world, this is what Canadians often say about themselves. That we're a
Yeah,
force for
right.
good in the world. Russia and Cuba literally were a force for good in the world. And when it comes to being a good friend to Africa, one can argue about Eritrea and Ethiopia under the Derg, but that's another argument for another day.
Yeah,
But
right.
Russia and Cuba were literally the best friends of Africa. And for Macron to say what he said, I just thought to myself, what
Yeah,
is this guy on?
I know. He's popping something all day, every day.
And
It
it was unbelievable. And for
is.
me, and by the way, for some of our French some of our French people who of an African background who do believe in this nonsense that Africa or our country specifically needs to have good relations with France. I just want to read this.
Yeah,
Sovereign Media posted this. Apparently, Jacques Chirac, former French president, said the following. So apparently, Jacques Chirac said the following: "We bled Africa for 4.5 centuries. Then we looted its raw material. After that, we said that Africans are good for nothing in the name of religion. Their culture has been destroyed. Now, things have been done with more elegance. We steal their brains through scholarships. Then we see that poor Africa is not in a brilliant shape, that it does not generate elites. After enriching ourselves at Africa's expense, Africa is given lessons." Apparently, former French President Jacques Chirac said that in 2001 at the
yeah,
France Africa Summit in Cameroon. Off the record, apparently, he said this off the cuff
mhm.
to the newspaper Le Monde.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Well, these are the people that William Ruto is dealing with and doing business with. And he's really an embarrassment to the African continent.
Yeah, and it's anywho shocking. It's
Yeah, it
just so
is.
shocking.
It
Anywho,
is.
Sabiomi.
Okay.
on to on to Lesotho. So as always, tell us what was Lesotho like before British colonialism, and how did it become a French? No, how did it become a British colony?
Mhm.
How did it become a British colony, and what were the socio-economic conditions for the people like under British rule?
Well, first of all, the history of Lesotho is, of course, overlapped with the history of the entire region of Southern Africa. We talked in previous weeks about the Neolithic period, so-called prehistoric period. I have a problem with the term prehistoric, but nonetheless, the so-called Neolithic period in Africa and in Southern Africa heavily overlaps. And in Lesotho, you can find the rock paintings in caves, as you can find them in other parts of Africa, going all the way up to ancient Egypt. So it's quite interesting that from literally from Cairo to Cape Town, there are similar historical patterns in regard to African history. So Lesotho was a country that was, as far as we can trace back, was occupied by the similar peoples, the Khoisan people, who were heavily hunters and gatherers. These were some of the original people in terms of what has been found based on archaeology and anthropology and historical research. And of course, there was the migration of other groups from East Africa and from Central Africa who came into the entire Southern Africa region. The language, the Sesotho language, has parallels going all the way up to different parts of East Africa, even in Kenya, for example. There are people who speak a language that is quite similar to Sesotho, which is the national language of the Kingdom of Lesotho today.
Yeah,
So it's quite interesting that despite the fact that anthropologists and historians have spent decades, literally, even centuries, trying to divide African peoples to show how dissimilar they are. But if you actually do the research, you can see the stark similarities that exist all across the continent, and particularly in the southern Africa region. So yes, there, beginning in around the 16th century, you had the migration of other groups from other parts of the continent. And of course, when that happened, you had the consolidation of various chiefdoms and clans, which came together. They consolidated around the beginning of the 19th century, when you had a paramount chief who later became King Musweswe I. He is the founder of the Kingdom of Basutoland. Musweswe was a very interesting, charismatic, and of course, tactical and diplomatic leader. He was able to bring together people from various chiefdoms in the region, clans, and other peoples, other African peoples from throughout the region, brought them together and formed what later became known as the Kingdom of Basutoland. Now, this happened at the same time that you had the encroachment of both the Boers and the British in the Southern Africa region. And of course, there was attempts to seize control of the area that became known as Basutoland, beginning in the early part of the 19th century. They wanted to take their land, they wanted to take their livestock, and of course, Musweswe I was instrumental in building an alliance of various African groups from across the region to fight against the Boers initially, and then, of course, later the British. So it's quite interesting that these nations today, Southern African nations, have a very similar history going back thousands upon thousands of years. So in the early part of the 19th century, around 1824, you had the efforts by the Boers to the Boer truckers, as they were called during that particular time period, to come in and try to seize control of Basutoland. Well, Musweswe was not only a diplomat and a tactician, he was also a military genius because he set up headquarters at Thaba Busia, a place called Thaba Busia, which is a mountainous area in Lesotho. And they were able to develop military tactics that staved off the so-called Afrikaners, later became known as Afrikaners, the Boers. And they fought them for decades. Between the 1820s all the way up to the 1850s. And of course, they were successful because they had this mountainous area and they were rolling rocks and stones down the mountains, and the Boers were never able to climb to the mountains and seize Musweswe and other people in Basutoland during the early and mid 19th century. Now, I visited Lesotho. In fact, I've spent most of the time in Africa was spent in Lesotho. So they took me to Thaba Busia to see the mountainous areas that was actually the headquarters and the fortress of King Musweswe I.
Interesting.
At the same time, during that particular time period, you had the intervention of missionaries. The Paris Evangelical Missionary Society, they came in and they brought in Western education. And Musweswe had a relationship with them because he wanted his people to be educated in Western standards. So they were instrumental in setting up educational institutions, initially primary and secondary education, and eventually higher education as we move more into the 20th century. So at the same time, the Boer truckers were vicious in regard to their activities against the African people. So Musweswe, being the diplomat and the tactician that he was, attempted to form an alliance, at least some type of tactical alliance with the British to stave off the settler colonialism that was encroaching the area that is now known as the Republic of South Africa. When that happened, of course, the British initially were reluctant to get involved, but eventually they did. And the British colonial system made Basutoland a protectorate of Britain. And this, of course, protected them from further encroachment by the Boers. Nonetheless, they took a considerable amount of land from traditional Basutu land kingdoms and chieftaincies. The entire Orange Free State, which is a province now of the Republic of South Africa, is actually Lesotho. The land was stolen by the Boers during the mid and late 19th century. So they had to settle for a smaller piece of land. And if you go to Lesotho now, you'll find that the majority of the country is mountainous, very rugged and
Yeah.
very arid. And the capital, Maseru, is flat in the flatland area. But once you leave Maseru, the capital, and enter the Orange Free State, the land is flat and it's heavily agriculturally producing area. So this is quite interesting to see that they wanted the best land in the area and forcing the African people into the mountainous areas. But in a sense, this assisted them in many ways. First of all, they were able to set up fortresses to stave off the Boers from further encroachment. Also, they developed their own unique culture and civilization in these mountainous areas in Basutu land. So in 1868, they became a protectorate of the British Crown. They were never a colony of the British. They were a protectorate. Now, people can argue and say, well, what's the difference between a protectorate and a colony? Well, the protectorates, there was a form of indirect rule. The chieftains, Musweswe initially, and then his descendants, had internal control in terms of appointing people to the chieftaincies, dividing people up within the country itself. So in that regard, they did have more internal control and more internal autonomy than the people in South Africa and other parts of the Southern Africa region, for example, Namibia and South Africa, that were totally taken over, by the Boers. Namibia, of course, the Germans had taken it over initially, and then after they lost during World War One, the British took over initially, and then after the formation of the so-called Union of South Africa, and then, of course, after the Union of South Africa, after World War II, and you had that election where the Nationalist Party became dominant in South Africa, and they set up the so-called apartheid system. It was horrendous, the conditions that existed there. So what happened after Musweswe died, which was around 1870, he had a series of successes, and the British thought that they could outmaneuver his successes and tried to disarm the Basutu people. And it was another war that developed around 1880, 1881 called the Gun War. And they fought the British as well. But eventually the British said, well, we'll just make you a protectorate and we'll bring about some type of rapprochement, so to speak, with the Boers in the broader Cape Colony as well as the Free State. So this is what happened during the latter part of the 19th century. Eventually, with the founding and the discovery of diamonds around Kimberley and also in the area around, the British facilitated actually the migrant labor system that did not only impact Lesotho, but other areas. We talked about Eswatini, for example.
Yeah.
People from there were recruited to work in the mines in South Africa. And this had a horrendous impact on agricultural development and livestock development in Lesotho. But they continued, and they became a center, in fact, in the 20th century for Western education throughout the entire region. And this is largely to do with the missionary societies and also the Roman Catholic Church, which had a strong influence as well, eventually in Lesotho. So this is what took place. The Union of South Africa was formed in 1910, which was a major threat to the independence, semi-independence of Basutu land. And when that happened, of course, they felt very threatened about what was taking place in neighboring South Africa. What's interesting is that Lesotho is one of the few countries in the world that is completely landlocked. They're totally surrounded now by the Republic of South Africa. So either
Yeah.
anywhere you go, whether it's north, south, east, or west, you'll wind up in the Republic of South Africa. But the mountainous terrain that exists there, one hidden treasure, of course, was water resources. And that was something that also made the Boers quite envious of Lesotho. But they were very much involved in the struggle against the racist settler colonial system in South Africa. And what happened, of course, was that when the African National Congress was formed, it was initially called the South African Native National Congress. We talked about this before in regard to Eswatini.
Yeah.
When they were formed, the chieftaincies in South Africa, the chieftaincies in Basotho land joined. They became part of the ruling council of the ANC in its earliest days. And this had an impact, of course, in regard to the history of Lesotho, even in the 20th century. And they played an important role, in fact, in the destruction of the apartheid system in South Africa. It's a history that very few people know about, but it's very, very important to point that out. So you had British protectorate status, you had the settler colonial system in South Africa, which became extremely strong. And then, of course, in World War II, there was the recruitment by the British of Basotho people into the war. Tens of thousands of them, I think about 20,000, served in the British Army during World War II. After World War II, of course, there was an upsurge in anti-colonial struggle all across the continent. And Lesotho was no exception to this. So they began to form political parties during the 1950s. So that gives you some idea about how the country was conquered, attempted to be conquered by the Boers. In fact, a lot of it was conquered by the whites in South Africa. The best land, and they conquered this land, but at the same time, the people still maintained their independence and sovereignty. And of course, later, during the period of the 1920s, 1930s, during the Great Recession, this had a tremendous and negative impact as well on Basotho land because the people were not able to earn a living. They had to be more dependents on Britain as well as the racist South African settler colonial system. So the Great Depression had a devastating impact on Basotho land as well as the Union of South Africa. But after the depression of the 1930s and World War II, where perhaps 20,000 Basotho served in that war, people came back with a different attitude. And it wasn't just in Basotho land or South Africa, it was all across the continent. People wanted to be free from colonialism, whether it's settler colonialism or classical colonialism.
Yes, and just like neighboring Swaziland, Eswatini also used for cheap labor in the grotesque mining industry with well, next to little to no workers' rights, very little protection against all the awful environmental impacts, health impacts that the mining industry does. So that's a good segue
Yes.
then.
And people had to leave their families, men,
Yes, yes,
you
yes.
know, to
Look,
go work in the mines. You know, so this had a tremendous impact on the stability of families throughout the entire region. And
yes,
the injuries
exactly.
were enormous. You know, people would die in those mines in these huge accidents. So it was a horrendous situation that was set up by both the Boers as well as the British in Southern Africa.
Now, how did the country become independent, and was it one of violent armed struggle, or was it a peaceful transfer of power?
It was a combination of both. As I mentioned, the fight during the early decades of the 19th century, mid 19th century, the fight with the Boers, Later in 1880, 1881, the gun war that was fought against the British. And of course, people continued to resist. And after the World War II period, there was the formation of three main political parties in Basotho land.
Yeah.
You had the formation of the Basotho Land Congress Party that was formed around 1952, and they considered themselves uh, not a part of the monarchy. They wanted national independence, and they saw themselves as part and parcel of the broader movement for Pan-Africanism on the continent. And then later, there was the formation of the Basotho Land National Party, the BNP, which was
Yeah.
heavily supported by the monarchy, by the chiefs, as well as by the Roman Catholic Church. And then several years later, during the early 1960s, there was a formation of a monarchist party, the Marimaklu Freedom Party, the MFP, came into existence. And their purpose was to defend the monarchy, the descendants of Moshoeshoe I, because there were a number of chiefs which came into power after his death. And Letsia, who Letsia the First was one of them. Leratoti was another who was in between 1891 and 1905. Then there was Letsia the Second, who was there. Griffith was there between 1913. Griffith was there between 1913 and 1939. And Siiso was there between 1939 and the early 1940s. And the regent, Masibo, who was there between 1940 and 1960. Now, all of these people were descendants, considered descendants of the founder of Basotho Land, Moshoeshoe I. So these three parties were formed, and they began to agitate for a removal of the protectorate system for national independence. So there was elections that were held in 1955. There was an election held which ostensibly granted autonomy in regard to internal affairs in Lesotho, in Basotho land.
Yeah.
Later, there was another election in 1965, which actually set the stage for the independence, which came in October of 1966. So when the country became independent, the initial elections in 1965 and the whole independence process of 1966 was dominated by the Basotho Land National Party, the BNP.
Yeah.
And it was headed by a man by the name of Leopold Jonathan.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So they became
Actually,
independent in 1966. Yeah.
actually, let me set it up. So, what's the socioeconomic legacy of Sekunoya Namia Masurbani of the BNP, the Basotho National Party? He was in office from May 6, 1965 to July 7, 1965. And then that of Lebowo Jonathan of the same party, the BNP, July 7, 1965, up until he was ousted in a coup January 20th, 1986. An important side note to add that they are a right-wing party. They are members of the African-wide branch of the global right wing. They're members of the Democrats Union of Africa and its global-wide organization, as I've mentioned many times, the International Democracy Union, where all of the openly center-right to far-right to hard-right, fiscally conservatives and often socially conservative, socially progressive parties come to advance their global right-wing agenda, unite the right, and see how they can help one another out. Stephen
Yes.
Harper, former Conservative Prime Minister of Canada, is its chairman. Its second in command is Brian LaFan of the Liberal Party of Australia, Conservative Party of Canada, Conservative Party of Brits, National Party of New Zealand, Republican Party of the US, the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan, the Liberal Party of Australia, just to name a few. And now the BNP, the party's ideology, according to Wikipedia, is conservatism, Christian democracy, Lesotho nationalism. And though I dispute how populism is wrongly associated with the far right, I'm going to assume when Wikipedia uses populism, they mean right wing to far right.
Yeah,
So,
right,
with all in
right.
mind, with all that in mind, do tell us the socio-economic legacy of the first two prime ministers of Lesotho.
Well, the under Leopold's government, they were heavily dependent upon revenue from the miners who went to work in the Republic of South Africa. And when the country became independent in 1966, the name was changed from Basotho land to Lesotho. So that's important to point out.
Yeah.
But yes, this was it's very interesting when you talk about the legacy of the Leopold Jonathan and the BNP. He was in power for like 2 decades. And despite the fact what you said in terms of conservatism, its alliance with the Roman Catholic Church and its monarchist tradition and character, they were strong supporters of the liberation movements in South Africa. And this caused a lot of problems between the Republic of South Africa under the Nationalist Party and the BNP government in Lesotho. I mean, that's very, very important to point out.
That is
And
interesting.
the elections were held in 1965. There was another election held in 1970, which it appeared as if the Basotho Congress Party, the BCP, that was headed by a man named Insu Mahetle, who was not a part of the royal family and considered himself a nationalist and a Pan-Africanist, a secular nationalist and Pan-Africanist. And he was heavily against the Catholic Church and its influence inside of Lesotho. Just to point out that Lesotho became a center for Western education in the entire region, where we talk about primary education, secondary education, as well as higher education. Pius XII University was formed, and it attracted people from throughout the entire region. So in that sense, it became a center for higher education in Southern Africa. A lot of people from the liberation movements, political parties from throughout the region attended university in Lesotho. Eventually became the National University of Lesotho. So in 1970, it appeared as if the BCP had won the elections. So Jonathan, under the BNP, declared a state of emergency and nullified the results of the elections. All right. And some of the leaders of the BCP went into exile. In 1974, it's reported that there was an attempted coup led by Mahetle and the BCP. And after that happened, a lot of people were in prison. They were driven into exile.
So,
Yeah.
so that's interesting. Actually, so talk a bit more then. What were the conditions that led to the military coup that saw President Jonathan ousted then? And Lesotho is ruled for the next 7 years. Safe to say by a military dictatorship and one of the far right, and if so, what was the socio-economic legacy of General Justin Mesting Lekanya, sorry if I'm butchering his name, who ruled from the 24th of January 1986 until himself he was ousted by the military May 2nd, 1991. What is his socio-economic legacy, and what were the conditions that led to his dismissal?
Well, what happened was that under Leopold Jonathan, strong relations developed between the African National Congress, particularly the military wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, and the Lesotho government. In fact, in 1974, Chris Hani, who was at one time commander, the late Chris Hani was one time commander of Umkhonto we Sizwe, and he was also, at the time of his assassination in 1993, he was the head of the South African Communist Party. All right. So he was in Lesotho between 1974 and 1982. So Lesotho was really, considering its mountainous terrain and its remote character, was ideal for launching guerrilla raids into the Republic of South Africa. And once the Boers figured this out, they went to Leopold and said, you got to get rid of the ANC refugees. You have to expel Chris Hani and turn him over to us, so we can prosecute him or either kill him. This is what Jonathan was told. So Jonathan refused. He said he was not going to turn over South African refugees to South Africa, and he was not going to abandon the people who were fighting to overthrow the racist system in South Africa, because he knew that if the liberation movements in South Africa failed, that the Boers would just come in and take over Lesotho. So in 1982,
yeah,
the South African Defense Forces staged a raid in Maseru and killed like 42 people. A lot of them were ANC people, others were Lesotho nationals. They also staged another raid in 1985 as well and killed people. So they were hell-bent on destroying the Mkhonto we Sizwe military wing of the ANC. Also, I did mention that there's also a Lesotho Communist Party that was formed during that particular time period, which had close ties with the ANC as well as the South African Communist Party. So what happened was that Jonathan refused to end his support for the African National Congress, and they convinced, this is the racist apartheid government convinced certain elements within the Lesotho military to overthrow Jonathan. That happened in January of 1986. Weeks prior to that, the South African Defense Forces blockaded Lesotho. They wouldn't allow any food to come in. They wouldn't allow people to leave Lesotho, because a lot of people work in South Africa. I mean, it's really no difference. I mean, the country is surrounded completely by the Republic of South Africa. So, and the borders are quite porous, and people have relatives in Lesotho. People have relatives in South Africa. Okay, so it's nowhere in the world they were going to, expel people who are really their relatives in actuality. So they blockaded the country, and as a result of that, it prompted a coup on the part of Lahania, Major General Lahania, against Abayomi Jonathan. Okay, so that's how that happened. And Hani, of course, left Lesotho and relocated in Angola and other countries in the region. So that's how Abayomi was overthrown. He had been in office for 20 years. They came in with a military regime between 1986 up until 1993, when there was an election held inside the country.
So,
but yes, it was, and Lahania himself was overthrown by another military leader, a lower-ranking military leader, and that happened in 1991.
What's his what's Lahania's what's Lahania's socio-economic legacy, and then what led to him being ousted by Major General Elias Fisona Ramania, who served office May 2nd, 1991 to April 2nd, 1993?
Well, just the overall dire economic conditions inside the country, and the fact that the liberation movements were making advances. They had already won in Namibia in 1990. And then, of course, in South Africa, they released Nelson Mandela and other top leaders of the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the South African Communist Party, the Black Consciousness Movement. A lot of them were released in 1990. And they were supposed to move towards a negotiated settlement of the apartheid system. This was under the President Botha.
Yeah.
And so all of this.
P.W. Botha, yeah.
Yeah, P.W. Botha, and then later de Klerk, F.W. de Klerk, who was considered, well, they tried to project him as a more liberal, racist, settler colonial leader.
Exactly.
But he was very underhanded in terms of how he tried to carry on the apartheid system in South Africa. The so-called third force that was developed, which was designed to pit various African groups against each other. For example, the Inkatha Freedom Movement was headed by a man named Gasha Buthelezi, later became the Inkatha Freedom Party. They were pit against the ANC and its supporters. The ANC, although it was banned in 1960, in 1976, of course, with the student and worker uprisings, A lot of people went into exile. They made contact with the liberation movements. They went back into the country and began to organize underground. And in 1983, this group called the United Democratic Front was formed, which was, in essence, they were charterists. They were really ANC under a different name.
Yeah.
Uh, so they recognized that the writing was definitely on the wall. And of course, that led to another coup in 1991 by Major General Ramamia. No, he was a lower-ranking military officer. And then in 1993, there was an election held, which the Basutu Congress Party won the elections, and it's
Actually, but
actually became prime minister.
actually, but before we get into that one, so okay, so that's interesting. So is it safe to say when there was the coup against President Jonathan, Lesotho was more or less under a proxy regime of the apartheid South African government?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. They were
Okay.
very strong supporters of the liberation movements in South Africa. And this is a history that is not well known. People assumed, and even a lot of people in Africa and other parts of Africa, because Lesotho was totally landlocked, it was completely surrounded by the Republic of South Africa. A lot of people who weren't aware assumed that it was a Bantustan, like Ciskei and Transkei and Bophuthatswana and others. You
Yeah.
know, and it never was a Bantustan. It was always a British protectorate. And even after it gained full independence in 1966, they had their own government, they had their own elections, and so forth. So, no, I don't accept that position that they were totally subservient to the Republic of South Africa. In fact, it was a diplomatic hub and center because of the racist apartheid system was considered bad. Even the West, at a certain point during the 1980s, they had to move away, at least in public, from what they call constructive engagement under the Reagan administration. But when the Anti-Apartheid Act of 1986-87 was passed, even the U.S. had to back away from open support for the racist apartheid system. So it's somewhat of a complicated, but it's a nuanced perspective, you know, in terms of the history of Lesotho.
So even when the apartheid government was able to oust President Jonathan, the
yeah,
success
prime minister, yeah, right.
the successor that he had, okay, so he gets power, he likes the power, but he still doesn't act as a proxy subservience to the apartheid regime. He still continues to support the anti-apartheid armed struggle and all.
Well, Lahania, for example, when he came into power, uh, his promise, you know, to the racist apartheid system that he would not allow the ANC to use Lesotho territory for attacks. But what happened 4 years later, in 1990, there was the Pretoria Minute that was signed around August of 1990, and this ostensibly suspended the armed struggle in South Africa against the white minority racist government. Didn't mean the struggle stopped. The struggle continued, and even military clashes took place during this period. So what happened was that in 1994, well, in 93, there was an election, and Mohetle became prime minister.
Yeah.
Now, he was with the BCP, but what happened was that in 94, of course, Nelson Mandela came to power in South Africa, but there were still problems internally in Lesotho between the various political parties and political factions inside the country. And Mandela got involved, the ANC government got involved trying to mediate these conflicts that were taking place in Lesotho. Mohetle stood for elections twice, but eventually what happened was there was a split within the BCP.
Yeah.
And another group came up called the Lesotho Congress for Democracy, the LCD, which was also headed by Mohetle. Eventually, he retired, and there was more political fragmentation inside Lesotho. The
Yeah,
LCD
because
split.
yeah,
Mhm.
because it's yeah, so it's a bit complicated
It
because throughout
is
all because throughout all this time as well, Lesotho is a constitutional monarch, and not
monarchy.
a constitutional monarch where the monarch of England's head of state, their own monarch,
Yes.
as you mentioned. So
Yeah, because the descendants of Mosweswe the First were still in power, and when even when the country became independent, uh, Mosweswe the Second became the constitutional head of government, even though Leopold Jonathan was the prime minister, and they were related; they were relatives. But in 1970, when there was a coup against the BCP, and it was a civilian coup. What happened after that was that the situation became even more complicated because you had a government that had not uh, won an election in 1970. The opposition party had been suppressed, and you had the king who was made head of state. Uh, but there was a conflict between Mosweswe II and the government in Lesotho. And eventually, what happened was that he was deposed as well, Mosweswe II, and his
yeah,
son Mahatu, who today is, let's see, the third, became the head of state. Lesotho has had several governments since the over the last 40 years, since 1986.
but yes, but throughout all of this time, in terms, when we look at the socio-economic legacy of all of these leaders, it's safe
Mm-hmm.
to say, so uh, be, 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 uh, so so the mining that they do they still engage in mining activity with South
Yes.
Africa while also supporting armed struggle against the apartheid regime of South Africa?
Well, even today, with you had 30 years of an ANC government, and then there was the Government of National Unity, which is headed by the ANC. There are people in Lesotho who still work in the mines in South Africa. Not as many, because South Africa is no longer the mining hub that it was decades ago. In terms of gold production, for example, there are other countries, even in West Africa, that produce more gold today than the Republic of South Africa. So they're not as dependent, and but people still travel a lot to do other jobs from Lesotho into South Africa.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
So,
it is. Yeah,
so apologies to our audience, but yes, it's quite a bumpy ride.
it
Lesotho
is.
Lesotho history. So, okay, so not much we can say about the socio-economic legacy of General Justin and then General Eliza Ramina. Democracy, as you mentioned, however frail, is restored. The country found itself under the leadership of Netsuo Mokali and the BCP, the
Right.
Batsulan Congress Party. The party,
Yeah.
according to Wikipedia, is left wing, Pan Africanist, leftist, African socialism, and African Lesotho nationalism. Now, he served April 2nd, 1993, until he was deposed on August the 17th, 1944, then an independent politician was installed. The interim prime minister was Hey Lefulu. You can already answer. Did he lean right wing, far left, or left leaning?
Well, it's kind of interesting that the BCP initially, yeah, you could say it was a left wing party, but after the 1970 state of emergency that was declared by the BNP, and particularly after the 1974 crisis, where there was reportedly an attempted coup led by Mohetle and the BCP against the BNP of Leopold Jonathan. There was uh, a whole problem that developed during that particular time period as well. And what happened was that, unfortunately, the BCP got the support of the apartheid regime, and they formed what they call the Lesotho Liberation Army. This was in the early 1980s, and they actually fought against their own government at the aegis of the racist apartheid system in South Africa. So it was a very interesting dynamic that developed. You had the BNP, which was considered more conservative or moderate, in alliance with the African National Congress as well as the South African Communist Party. And you had the BCP, which was considered more left wing, that was actually being supported by the proponents of apartheid in South Africa. An amazing scenario, but that's what happened.
Talk about topsy turvy, and then
It
so
is, yeah.
so you had this interim prime minister, Hey Hufulu, substituted from August 17th to September 14th, 1994, and then the BCP under Makuli mounted a political comeback, serving in office 14th of September 1994 to 29th of May 1998. What is his socio-economic legacy? Apartheid regime has fallen, but economic apartheid remains, which we'll get into when we cover South Africa. So,
Mm-hmm.
so what's his socio-economic legacy for Lesotho now that racial apartheid is gone?
Well, they had signed an agreement to develop what they call the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. There was a treaty that was signed prior to the ANC coming to power in 1994. So they had this huge dam project that was supposed to supply water to the Republic of South Africa. I visited Hakatsi was the town, and they were building this huge dam. This was in the early 1990s, and it has been complete. In fact, Cyril Ramaphosa just went to Lesotho recently to more or less finalize this huge water project that is a partnership between Lesotho and the Republic of South Africa. But yes, it's a very, very interesting situation. Now, Lesotho is part of the Southern African Development Community, and they work closely with other countries in the region. There's 16 other countries. The 15 other countries is a 16-member regional federation, and they have intervened. They intervened in 1995 when there was an attempted coup in Lesotho. The South African National Defense Forces, which was under the ANC, this was the reform military of South Africa,
Yeah.
Intervened along with the Botswana Defense Forces to put down this rebellion that took place during the mid 1990s.
Wow. So and as you already mentioned, the BCP was
Yeah.
it was sort of infiltrated by apartheid South Africa. So on paper, they're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be basically the Lesotho version of South Africa's ANC, but they actually governed from the right.
Yeah, they
When they
did.
were in power, they actually governed from the right.
Yeah,
Now,
and Mugabe was quite old when he came to power, and he made a lot of errors. And there were people who were around him who were part of the BCP, broke with him. And you had the formation of the LCD, the Lesotho Congress
yes.
for Democracy. And even there was a split later, became the All Basotho Convention. So there was a reconfiguration of domestic politics in Lesotho in the 1990s, the 2000s, and all the way up to the present. In fact, the most recent elected prime minister uh, was not with any of those parties. He
Yeah.
set up a separate party. So it's quite interesting.
Now, Abayomi, I know you're pressed for time today. How much more time do I actually have with you?
Go another 10 minutes. Good. Yeah.
Another 10 minutes. Okay, so this will be the last question, and then we'll have to do it to
Okay.
be continued, and we'll cover the rest of
Yeah,
this
we can
in
do
the
a
next.
second part because it's a lot to discuss. You know, it's a small country. The population is about 2.3 million, but it has a profound history. I mean, we even had to skip over some aspects of the history of Lesotho, which is quite interesting. Yeah.
You know what we're going to do? We're going to do this since we actually do not
Okay.
have since we actually don't have enough time. We're going to do the following. So,
Yeah.
folks,
Okay.
folks, join us next week We're gonna do part two. We're gonna do part two with Lesotho. Abayomi has some important engagements he has to go to. So we were drawing this edition of One Plus One, our all things Africa history with Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Report. Donate, subscribe to those outlets. Donate and subscribe to One Plus One, and join us next week for part two of Lesotho's topsy turvy history and current affairs.
Yes. Yeah.